They swore us to silence the same way they swear us to service, with a hand on something old, which with eyes that don't blink, with the unspoken understanding that what happens inside these walls stays inside these walls, or you don't stay anywhere at all. I kept that oath for 31 years, which I polished my boots until I could see my own guilt in them. I stood at attention through 4 prime ministers, 2 jubilees, 3 funerals that shook the country, and 1 morning in the East Corridor that I have never, not once, written down, spoken aloud, or allowed myself to revisit past 2 in the morning when the drink runs thin and the dark gets loud. Pretty much, until now. What I'm about to tell you wasn't discovered in an archive. It wasn't leaked by a disgruntled aide or reconstructed from palace documents. It was witnessed, I guess, by me. By a man who was standing 6 feet from a door he was never supposed to stand near, on a night when the fog off the Thames was so thick you could press your hand into it and feel it push back. I mean, there was a boy. Not a boy anymore. A man by then. 60-something years of quiet exile wearing itself into his face, the way weather wears into stone. He had her eyes, and I noticed it before I noticed anything else, before the nerves, before the protocol, before I understood what I was actually looking at. He had her eyes, that specific gray, the color of English coastline right before it rains. And he was standing in a part of the palace that doesn't officially exist on any public record. I was told, to be fair, afterward, that I had seen nothing. I was told with the kind of calm that only men with absolute power can manage. The kind of calm that doesn't need to raise its voice because it already controls everything the voice might threaten. I nodded. I said, "Yes, sir." I went back to my post, and I have said nothing for 22 years. But she's gone now, and the men who gave me that order are gone. And I'm 64 years old with a bad knee and a clean conscience, and precisely nothing left to protect, except the one thing they never managed to take from me. The truth has weight, which I've been carrying it long enough to know. This is what happened. The night it began, I wasn't supposed to be there. That is the first thing you need to understand. So my post was the north entrance, Buckingham's less theatrical side, the servants' artery, the functional gut of the place where laundry trolleys and florists and the occasional bewildered MP moved through without ceremony. I had worked it for 6 years. I knew, actually, its rhythms the way you know your own heartbeat. The 11 p.m. kitchen closure, the 11:40 linen rotation, the security sweep at midnight that came through smelling of canteen coffee and mild boredom. That night, Corporal Davies had pulled his back, lifting a barrier during the afternoon changeover. Not dramatically. No crack. No collapse. Just the quiet, structural failure of a man in his mid-40s who has stood at rigid attention for 2 decades and asked his spine to simply keep cooperating. He was sitting in the guard room with a heat pack pressed to his lower back and the particular expression of a man who can't decide whether the pain or the embarrassment is worse. I covered his post. It's East Corridor. Exterior approach, well, to the private apartments. A post so sensitive and so dull simultaneously that the joke among the guard was you'd either see nothing for a year or something you'd take to your grave. There was no, I guess, in between, which the corridor itself was long enough to hear your own echo, lit in that peculiar amber that royal residences favor. Not warm, not cold, just old, the color of things that have been kept. So I had been standing there 40 minutes when I heard the car. Not through the door, through the wall. Old walls conduct sound differently than modern ones. They don't insulate, they translate, passing vibration through stone in low, muttered frequencies. A vehicle. Slow. No escort engine note, which meant no standard convoy. Well, and then, nothing. Doors, probably, but sort of, at that distance, reduced to a single soft percussion. I checked my log. Nothing scheduled. Not the door at the far end of the corridor opened. Not with urgency. Not with the brisk, shoulder-first momentum of staff on a deadline. It opened the way a door opens when the person on the other side already knows what's on the other side and is in no particular hurry about it, which, inside this building, was itself a form of power. Unhurried and certain. Two people came through, which the first I recognized immediately. Alderton, not his real name, but I'll use it here, was a senior equerry of the private household, gray at the temples, carrying the professionally neutral expression that Eton and 30 years of royal adjacency will sandpaper onto a man's face. He had the posture of someone waiting to be photographed, and the eyes of someone calculating whether they need to be. The second man I didn't recognize. He was older than I expected. Not elderly, but seasoned, on the way men get when they've absorbed rather than avoided whatever life sent them. Heavy through the shoulders, which a dark coat that wasn't cheap, but wasn't tailored to any standard I recognized from palace adjacency. Not Savile Row, not military. Something continental, or something chosen by a man who hadn't spent his life being dressed. His shoes were excellent. His basically bearing was the strangest thing. Not aristocratic, not deferential, but that specific middle register that belongs to people who have spent a long time knowing their worth and choosing not to advertise it. And then he turned his head. I was 6 feet away. He didn't look at me the way visitors look at guards, which is to say, through us, the practiced social transparency of the privileged encountering the decorative. He looked at me, directly. A second's assessment, a slight nod, the nod of a man accustomed to noticing security, to registering it, and to acknowledging it as real. And I guess I saw his eyes. Gray. That specific, irrefutable gray. I mean, seen them in photographs and in oil portraits. On the face of a woman whose image was so institutionally ubiquitous for so many decades that most of us stopped actually looking at her, the way you stop hearing a piece of music you've heard too many times. But standing in that amber corridor at 11:52 p.m. on a November night, with fog pressing at the windows, I looked, and I saw, and what I saw sat in my chest like cold water swallowed too fast. Alderton spoke to me. Corporal. He had, I noticed, not expected me. Davies was a known quantity, a man who had presumably stood this post before, who knew the architecture of this evening. I was an anomaly, and Alderton processed that in approximately half a second, arriving at professional damage control. Quiet night. Not a question, a statement with the grammatical weight of an instruction. "Yes, sir," I said. The older man said nothing, but he looked at me again, that same registering look, and there was something in it that wasn't. Wariness, exactly. Wasn't threat. More like recognition that accompanies being seen by someone who doesn't look away. He knew I'd noticed. He knew I was logging it behind my eyes even if my face stayed regulation blank. He knew all of it, and he chose to let it stand, and that choice was its own kind of communication. They moved past me, through the second door, the one without a number, the one with the different lock. I stood. I completed my log entry for 11:52 p.m. in the exact same handwriting I used for everything else. Corridor clear. Like no incidents. My penmanship has always been a point of mild personal pride. It was steady. I wasn't. The thing about standing guard, really standing it, not just wearing the uniform and occupying the space, is that you develop an almost physical sensitivity to wrongness. Not danger, exactly. Wrongness. And the note. That doesn't fit the chord. Years, I mean, of it trains something into you below conscious thought. A standing wave of attention that vibrates when the pattern breaks. The pattern had broken, which I stood in that corridor for another hour and 12 minutes. The sounds from beyond the unnumbered door were nothing. Murmured conversation, once, which silence after that. When Alderton came back out alone, he didn't look at me at all, which was worse than the looking. The older man didn't come back out, not while I was there. In the morning, I mentioned nothing to Davies when I handed back his post. His back was better, and he was grateful. I went to breakfast, ate powdered eggs, and stared at the middle distance. I had a name for what I'd seen. I just hadn't let myself say it yet. The British Royal Guard doesn't ask questions, and this isn't a written rule. It doesn't need to be. It is transmitted through atmosphere, through the particular quality of silence that descends when a junior guardsman lingers a moment too long near a conversation he wasn't invited to join, through the careful blankness of senior officers when certain subjects approach, through the fact that 20 years inside these walls will teach you, with absolute precision, the exact size and shape of the things you're not permitted to see. I pretty much had been seeing them for years. Most of us had. The household runs on a parallel information economy, informal and unacknowledged, where things are known without being spoken and decisions are communicated through adjustments in routine rather than direct instruction. You learn to read the gaps. Kind of. An unusual staffing change. A corridor abruptly out of service for maintenance that begins on a Tuesday and ends before anyone has seen a single workman. A name that circulates for 48 hours in careful lowered voices and then simply stops. I read the gaps. Plus, in the 3 weeks after November, after the East Corridor, after the gray eyes, I read them with the focus of a man trying to reconstruct a sentence someone has burned, not conspicuously. Plus, I want to be clear about that. I didn't ask questions. I didn't linger. I didn't pull files I had no business touching. What I did was pay closer attention to things I was already in the presence of, which is, technically speaking, exactly what I was employed to do. The first gap, Davies mentioned, without particular emphasis, that Alderton had taken personal leave beginning the Friday after that night. 11 days. Alderton, I guess, didn't take personal leave. In the 6 years I had known him by sight and proximity, he had been, to my knowledge, absent from the palace exactly twice. Once for a surgery he referred to obliquely as the knee business, and once for a funeral he attended in the capacity of official representative. 11 personal days unannounced in November. I noted this. The second gap was smaller and stranger, and on the Thursday following, I was posted at the South Garden entrance for the afternoon. A nothing post. Ceremonial. A post you gave to men who needed a rest day on their feet. Midway through my shift, one of the housekeeper's assistants came through with a document trolley, standard weekly filing run, the kind of thing that's so routine as to be invisible. But the, I guess, trolley was moving toward a wing I knew to receive files only on Mondays, and when she passed me, there was a particular intentness in her face that hadn't thing to do with the weight of the trolley. I held the door for her. She thanked me with the eyes of someone who wasn't thinking about thanking me. So 2 days later, I saw Alderton's deputy, a younger man named Fenn, mid-30s, the institutional earnestness of someone still performing competence for an audience he hasn't realized stopped watching, emerge from the private secretary's corridor with a folder tucked under his arm and the specific chin set of a man who has just been told something he needed not to know. I recognized the look. I had worn it myself for 3 weeks. The gaps were accumulating. And then Renner spoke to me. Sergeant Major Renner, Household Division, 28 years of service, The kind of man the guard produces in its best years. Unshowy, exact, carrying the weight of institutional memory like ballast that kept him level in any sea. He wasn't a friend. Guardsmen at our level don't precisely have friends within the service. We have colleagues, and we have men we'd take a bullet for, which is a different category. But he was someone I respected without reservation, which in this context carried more weight. He found me at the end of a shift, in the narrow corridor outside the equipment store, at the hour when the building exhales and the day's performance goes briefly off stage. He didn't approach me exactly. He simply happened to be walking in the same direction. "You're watching things," he said, without preamble. I said nothing, and the correct move. "I'm not telling you to stop." He was looking ahead, not at me. "I'm telling you, to be careful what you do with it." "With what, sir?" He stopped walking, turned, looked at me directly, the way Renner always looked at things, like he was checking whether it was structurally sound. "There are arrangements in this institution," he said, "that are older than the people who currently maintain them. The maintenance isn't," he chose the next word precisely, "voluntary. Do you understand me?" I understood him. "There was a period," he continued very quietly. So now we'd stopped pretending this was anything other than what it was. "In the early 50s. I think before the coronation. She wasn't yet—" He stopped, started again differently. "There, I guess, were decisions made by people who believed they were protecting the institution. People who believed, and perhaps were right, to believe that some knowledge is structurally incompatible with the function it would destroy." The equipment store hummed behind me. On fluorescent flicker, I'd reported twice and stopped reporting. "What decisions?" I said. And Renner did something I had never seen him do. He looked, briefly, like a man who was tired. Not the physical tired of long shifts or age. The other kind. The tired that accumulates in men who have held things for too long without being permitted to set them down. "The kind," he said, "that last 70 years. He walked away, and I stood in the fluorescent hum and felt the cold water sensation again. That swallowed weight settling into my sternum, heavier than the last time, because this time it came with the specific gravity of confirmation. I had known something. Now I knew I was right to know it. The thing about institutions, this institution basically, the oldest functional monarchy in Europe, the one that has absorbed revolution by making revolution unnecessary, and that has survived by making itself so thoroughly symbolic that attacking it feels like attacking weather. The thing about it's that it doesn't hide things carelessly. It hides them architecturally. The secrets are load-bearing. They are not buried because they're shameful. They are buried because the structure that rests on top of them would shift if they moved. Renner knew what, was in the East Corridor that November night. For more than that, Renner had been knowing it for a very long time. And actually, he had just, in the most careful language available to a man in his position, told me to decide what kind of person I was going to be about it. I went home. I sat with my boots still on. I stared at the wall. The wall didn't offer an opinion. Plus, 22 years is a long time to carry something that doesn't belong to you. I retired from the household division on a gray March morning that felt, appropriately enough, like England, apologizing for nothing in particular. There was a small ceremony, a handshake from a man I'd never spoken to before and would never speak to again. A certificate, that used language so formal it felt like being described by someone who had never met me. I folded it, put it in my coat, took the tube home, and made tea. I didn't think about the East Corridor. I thought about it continuously. The years have a way of working on a secret, on not softening it. That's a lie people tell themselves about time. Time doesn't soften. What it does is clarify. The urgency fades. The context fills in. The noise of daily life that you used between yourself. The thing quiets down, and eventually you're left with just the thing. Sharp and unpadded, exactly as large as it always was. His name was Edward. I found this out not through any active investigation, but through the particular indiscretion of a man who had also been carrying it too long. Not Renner. Renner died in 2019, a Tuesday. Brief notice in the household retirees circular. No cause listed in the way that sometimes means something. The man who told me was someone I will not name here. Someone who had been in the private secretary's office in a junior capacity during the relevant years. Someone who had reached his own late-stage reckoning and chosen me, specifically, as the vessel for it at a retirees' gathering in Aldershot that smelled of old carpet and institutional catering. He had too much of the cheap wine they'd put out. He sat next to me because I was quiet, and he said, "You know they had a boy." I set down my glass. He didn't look at me when he said it. He was looking at the middle distance that men of our type develop, the guard's gaze. What trained on the horizon rather than the immediate, a professional habit so deeply grooved it survives retirement. Before the coronation, months before, private arrangement which the father, he stopped. His jaw worked. Honestly, the father wasn't a suitable person for that particular, juncture in history. Where's he now? I asked. Gone, which actually, the natural way, I mean. Died, I think, in the 90s. Somewhere on the continent. And he had a life. They gave him a life, to his credit. Some money, a name that wasn't quite his own, a place to be that wasn't here. They weren't cruel about it. He said this last part with the tone of a man who needs to believe it. They weren't cruel. One, he had been born in the winter of 1952. This much the man in Aldershot gave me, with the weary precision of someone reciting coordinates to a place they've been too many times. Arrangements had, I guess, been made by people who no longer existed. I formalized in documents that had been sealed in a category of archive. That requires something considerably above my former clearance to access, and something considerably beyond any journalist's persistence to obtain. The mother had done what was required of her in the way that the institution had always required it, with the kind of unflinching internal sacrifice that the public would have called duty, and the private record would call something with more weight. She had been 25 years old. I held that number in my mind for a while. 25, and I thought about what I was at 25. Nervous, ambitious in a small-scale way, still capable of being undone by minor humiliation. I thought, about being 25 and being told what she had been told, and about having the kind of character. Because she had it. Whatever you believe about the institution she represented, she had it. That could absorb that instruction and continue. The man in Aldershot went to get more wine. He didn't come back to the conversation. Plus, I don't think he remembered having it by the end of the evening. I think some part of him needed the words outside of his body just long enough to set them down. Once they were down, he needed to step away from them and keep living. I understand that. I drove home from Aldershot slowly, on the way you drive when you're not really in a hurry to get anywhere, because the thing you're thinking about is coming with you regardless. The motorway at night has its own quality. The red tail lights ahead of you, the dark on both sides, the sense of moving through something rather than toward anything. I had the window cracked. Cold. The kind of cold that sharpens rather than numbs. Edward. He would have been in his 60s when I saw him in the East Corridor. The build matched. The bearing, that particular unperforming self-containment, made sense now in a way it hadn't. A man who had lived his whole life knowing precisely who he was, and precisely that he would never be permitted to be it, publicly develops a specific kind of stillness. Not resignation. Stillness. The kind that has been arrived at through long engagement with an unanswerable situation and has come out the other side into something like peace. He had looked at me, which I have thought about that look many times over 22 years. In the first years, I thought about it with the professional anxiety of a man who wonders if he has been identified as a risk. Later, I thought about it differently. Plus, I think now that he looked at me the way anyone looks at the first person they encounter after stepping back into a place they have been kept from, with a kind of raw noticing. An inventory of what it actually looks like. The way returned travelers look at ordinary things and find them extraordinary for 30 minutes before the ordinary reasserts itself. He was inside the palace, which may be for the first time, maybe for the last. I don't know what happened in the room with the unnumbered door. I don't know what was said, or given, or withheld. I don't know if it was a formal acknowledgement or a private one, or something in between that has no name in official protocol, because official protocol was never built to contain it. She was gone, 9 months after that November. He was gone, the Aldershot man said, sometime in the 90s. Both of them carrying, in different directions, the weight of something that was decided before either of them had the vocabulary to refuse it. I've written this down now. I don't, in my opinion, know what I expected to feel.